Hey guys, Mr. E here. Today we're talking about the Stimms, the custom cartel specials that the Hive Scum and the Hive Scum alone has access to. You can share these with other players through an ability called Stim Supply, but you cannot use them directly on other players without that. And the only the Hive Scum can actually use these. I thought some players were seeing this UI and thinking this was coming to all classes. No, this is Scum only territory. Now, Hive Scum actually do have the option of not using these stims and instead using in-game ones. We'll talk about whether or not this is like a good idea ever later on. Spoiler alert, it's not. But before I do get into anything about these stims, remember, if you like Darktide content, if you want to know more about the game, and you want to see some cool builds and tricks and stuff, you should subscribe, and I'll be sure to give you that stuff. Thanks. Okay, let's begin with the real basics of the stim mechanic. This stim has a 15-second duration, and that is constant no matter how much points you have allocated to the stim. The only thing that can change the duration of your stim is this talent right here, which will give you 5 seconds more. So if you have a stim that's like this, where it's got these points allocated here, you can see I have a 44-second cooldown. Well, you would think that that means that I'm going to have 15 seconds on the juice, and then when I come out of it, it's only 30 more seconds until it's ready again. But unfortunately, this stim cooldown does not start until this is out of our system. So what you'll see here, if you watch that right side of the screen, after this stim wears off, which we have about 5 seconds to go here, you'll see that 4 icon on the right side of the screen, right over my elbow, will start to slowly fill up again, or actually come from the top down. Now, here's where I get on my soapbox and say, hey, Fat Shark, if you're watching this right now, which I'm going to try to get you to, can you please create a better UI for at least this cartel special stim? This is next to invisible. Like, you can't barely tell the difference between those colors at all, and it is like, yeah, it's just super hard to tell when it's gonna wear off and when I'm gonna have it again. And that is just like all of my information is crammed in that bottom right corner. And this is a class where I really don't want to be looking over at the extreme right side of my screen because I'll die in like a split second anyway. So yeah, please, it would be really nice if there was like, when you're stimmed, you would have this fog effect on the edge of the screen, and you see it slowly fading down like sand running out of an hourglass until it expires. So you know like when it's about to expire, and then you'd have like a juice meter somewhere on the HUD that's like filling up slowly. That's a vibrant color and not like beige, gray, green that I can't even see. Okay, so that's my little soapbox segment over there. Now, please note that when I said there that we have that 15-second duration going, we can add 5 more seconds to that duration with long-lasting, this talent right here, and that would make my cooldown total go from, instead of 15 plus 44 for a total of 59 seconds, which is roughly a 25% uptime, I would instead add 20 plus 64 seconds, because that's how long that would be. Or sorry, 20 plus 44 seconds, my bad, for a total of 64, and then that means that we would do 20 divided by 64 is about a 31% uptime. So you'll get more uptime out of this. The only downside is you can't stim as often, and there are certain talents in the tree that want you to stim more often versus having longer stim effects on you. So just keep that in mind, that you have to balance those two against each other. But overall, this is a very good effect. It's like 30%, 33% increase to how long your stim actually lasts, and stim can have some pretty dang good effects. Now, beyond that, we need to actually talk about how these stims function in terms of their stats. And these stats are not all created equally. In fact, there's only 2 branches here that I think are really worth anything on like 90% of builds of this class, and there's 1 branch on here that's really only worth anything on one specific build. So we'll get into that. There's also 1 branch that I think is entirely worthless and needs to be reworked from the ground up, and I suppose we'll start with that one, which is this right here. Barrage. This tree right here gives you toughness regeneration to a maximum of plus 100, or you can go to 80% here and then down for replenishing 25% toughness. So this is really bad. It does give you a minus percentage damage taken, but this is not a tank class. Taking less damage is not going to save your life in any way, shape, or form. So this is not usable on yourself, and you should not be using it on yourself. You might look at it. I could forgive a player for looking at toughness regeneration and being like, oh, wow, that means that like I'm going to get a ton of toughness back. Unfortunately, this game does not have a lexicon, but this means you are getting toughness coherency regeneration, and that alone. Toughness coherency regeneration, just to give you an idea of how effective it is, when you are near your allies and away from any enemies that are engaging you in close range, in melee, only then can you regenerate coherency toughness. And that is not very often for this front line, running, gunning, surrounded by enemies at all times shooter guy. He is going to be blocked from regenerating in 90% of cases. So that's right out in that situation. But even if you are near your allies and away from the enemy's melee attacks, you will still only regenerate 7.5 just flat, not even percent, 7.5 toughness per second when you have all 3 of your allies near you. And that, in comparison to the pool of over 200 toughness that this class has with an average build, is very, very small indeed. So it's not worth it at all to spec for that, because it's going to take you over 30 seconds to replenish. Now, if you used a stim that had all those allocated, well, then you could replenish it in like 18 seconds of just standing around near your allies and not taking any shots or anything, but not worth it at all in any way, shape, or form. Because as I showed previously, as you allocate points, it makes your cooldown get longer and longer. So if you were going for a build that utilized some damage potential up here, and you're like, well, I might as well get some tankiness, that's the wrong decision. Because as you allocate points here, you are adding a ton of time to the cooldown for this stim. You're making the stim worse and have worse uptime for the actual damaging effect that you probably want, in the lieu of getting like damage reduction for damage that you probably shouldn't be taking in the first place. And as I said before, there's really no tank archetype for this class, so taking less damage is really silly. Yeah, it's very, very weak, and I think this should be reworked entirely and made into something more interesting that can be utilized by this class more usefully, and also other classes would want as well, because even with stim supply, you wouldn't want this because it raises the cooldown too much and it's not worth it. From there, let's go into a tree that's actually any good at all, which is this top tree, the strength tree. You get 20% strength on any of the 3 forks that you go into, and this one at the bottom gives 15% crit chance, this one gives 35% finesse, and this one gives 15% rending. The worst of these 3 by far is the rending. That doesn't actually provide you any extra damage, it just makes your damage hurt armored enemies a little bit more, like 15% of your damage will go through as true damage, but that's really only going to be effective against crushers and other carapace enemies. You could probably pull the same or more damage by adding 15% crit or 35% finesse to your build, which would, in lieu of this here, it would actually make you crit or crit harder, and that would punch through armor even more. So you're going to get more damage on all targets, plus on armored targets by grabbing one of these. This one is right out. So I think that should probably be touched up or buffed in terms of rending a little bit more up there. Now, we come down here, and we're going to go over to the spur side of things. This is the attack speed tree. This tree also runs into a similar situation where up here, I think these 2 are perfectly valid and good, and I utilize them on all my melee builds. I don't know why I'm allocated over here for melee, but yeah, I utilize these on my melee builds, these 2 right here. And on my range builds, I always utilize this one right here. Why? Because reflex gives you 30% reload speed and minus 50% recoil. That is a very, very good stat for pretty much any desperado running gunning build, because the more ammo you can jam back in your gun, the faster you can fire, the faster you can kill, the longer you have your uptime, and the more resources you cheat out of this cool ability. So you want this fully allocated here. The other 2 options are Spur with attack speed, stun immunity, and slowdown immunity, and Fervor with this dodge and movement speed. Personally, I don't like Fervor. I think this is probably not a good design for one of these stims. Personally, I think that you probably don't want things that affect the way your character moves and dodges and the speed that you move at and how you control tied to a cooldown ability. Because, and this might just be a me thing, but I feel like I have a really good feel on how my character moves and dodges at any given time, and if I suddenly have a stim or a cooldown based mechanic that is going to make my character play different, and feel different, even if it's just 10%, that's going to throw me off more than it's really going to help me. And these numbers are small enough that I'm not going to feel that big a difference, but I might feel the difference in the sense of like, okay, I was reliant on dodging something with that dodge distance, and now the cooldown went off, and now I have to readjust how I'm playing. I'd rather just stick with the normal stuff. Plus, this is expensive in terms of time. You can see it's a 10-second jump, and it doesn't give you any additional attack speed. So if I'm coming down here for attack speed, I probably don't care about dodging that much better when this class is already a crazy dodger to begin with. And I definitely don't care about it 10 seconds of cooldown worth. The other one over here, Spur, is going to give me stun and slowdown immunity, but what I want to point out about this is because this one is definitely for ranged attackers, I would never go for this when I'm shooting a ranged gun instead of this, because they are mutually exclusive. So I would take this only if I was going for melee, right? Well, if you're going for melee, chances are you're taking this ability, and this ability has inbuilt stun and suppression immunity in it. So the only thing you're getting out of this is 4% attack speed and slowdown immunity, which is a very rare status effect. So this is 5 points, aka 10 seconds of cooldown added to your ability for 4% attack speed effectively, which is not worth. So this node is not worth, this node is not worth, this node is goated for range builds. And then we come to our last tree down here, which is a very confusing tree indeed, which is the cooldown tree. Cooldown regeneration. These nodes to here, all of them additively give you 25% cooldown regeneration. This last one gives you 25% cooldown regeneration flat. So your thought process might be something like, oh, well, this will make my ability come up faster, and I'll just stim up. If 50% cooldown regeneration means it takes an ability like Desperado here with a 45-second cooldown, and 50% increased cooldown will give us 30-second cooldown, right? But what you're forgetting is that stims have only a 15-second base duration. So over that 15-second duration, what are you going to gain? Well, you're going to gain 1/2 of that 15 seconds. You're only going to gain 7.5 seconds worth of cooldown for this tree right here. And that is the real kicker there. The other really big problem, and we'll look at these as well, Hypex gives you an additional 75% for effectively doubling your cooldown when you get a melee kill for 1 second. Same with this, but for range kills. The other really big problem with all this cooldown based stuff is that this class, specifically this class, has tons of lockouts for its cooldown based abilities. In fact, both Rampage and Enhanced Desperado, when the abilities are active, they completely lock you out from regaining cooldown in any way, shape, or form. So this Stimm, oftentimes when you're going into Desperado mode, right, you want this active. You want to be like juiced up, because it's the difference between going like this and like this. Right, so you're going to get way more bullets downrange, and when you're going Desperado mode, that's going to mean you have more efficiency there. So you definitely want that bottom left tree for Desperado, but you also want the cooldown. You want to get the cooldown back. Well, guess what? During Desperado, you can't get cooldown back for Desperado. You can only get it back after the fact. And if your Stimm is active during the ability, well, it's then by necessity not active after the ability ends. So you won't get any of these benefits unless you use the Stimm when Desperado isn't active, which would be a waste of this side of the tree. So you could go into a full cooldown thing so you have Desperado up more often, but then you're depriving yourself of any benefit over here, in terms of like actually pumping when it's time to pump. And trust me, this gives you way better results out of Desperado builds than having slightly better cooldown does. Remember, again, between 7.5 and 15 seconds of cooldown is all this is going to be able to cut off for you if you're playing optimally. And what are you losing? Well, you're losing potentially tons of DPS, the tons of effective, like this will extend the duration of your Desperado by a very long time. And for melee focus builds, the cooldown on Rampage is only 30 seconds, and it's just not, it's not important. Like you'll get it back way quicker if you just exist than if you put any sort of cooldown into it. The only one that it does kind of matter with is for our lovely Stim Supply ability, which we'll talk about here in a second. But Stim Supply also has a funny interaction with this. Stim Supply, when you drop it, it locks you out of cooling it down for I think about 8 seconds. 5, 6, 7, Okay, so it's like 6 or so seconds before you can start regenerating at all. Now, it does help this ability to some extent because this ability can deploy this to your whole team and it lingers for 15 seconds, which is good, and you can have the Stimm in a backup. But it really blocks you from getting a big portion of its effect when you drop this ability. So if you're stimmed up, when this ability is dropped, you actually need to drop the ability and then wait a couple seconds and then stim to get the cooldown. It's bizarre and it's weird, but all of these abilities have cooldown lockouts, which makes this stim really, really hard to use and worth way less than it seems on its face. And just to point out, this cooldown ability really isn't that good on its face. The only thing this is going to be good for is providing it to the whole team. And I think that's what it's built around. I think that's why this is such a low number, is because if you can apply 50% cooldown to everybody else in the team, they can do some better work. Like that'll help them a good bit. But for you personally, it's not going to do almost anything outside of that one build where you can share it with everybody else. So in summary here, this tree, specifically this and going here, is for all range builds. I think that's just the best way to go for range builds. You have a choice of like up here or right here for melee focus builds, I would say. And then if you're going for stim supply stuff, probably just cooldown or cooldown and some damage, maybe even potentially rending here if you're going with like a flame staff psyker, but I really don't feel like flame staff psykers need that much help. And they would probably also just prefer like crit as well. But the real kicker, even for stim supply, is that stim supply has this little node here called practice deployment, that when your stim, your 4 expendable stim becomes available, it refreshes the duration of this immediately. So having a shorter duration stim or a shorter cooldown stim is going to mean you can put out more stim supplies. So what's more effective? A stim supply that's only able to be dropped every let's say like 50 seconds or so because of that extra cooldown cheating, or a stim supply that can be dropped every 35 seconds because you've got something like this slotted in there and you can drop it much more often and therefore have more uptime for you and your whole team. There is certainly some very complex math to be done there, but I think that even with stim supply, you want to steer away from over investing and getting to that 75 point maximum. And I think that's it, except for talking about chemical dependency down here. Chemical dependency is a very, very powerful node. It requires you to stim yourself at least once every 90 seconds. And remember, this is very important to do the math on, right? 90 seconds means 90 seconds from the time that you inject that juice in your veins. So starting right now is when that buff starts to wear off. And that means I have to wait 15 seconds for this buff to fade, and then the cooldown of the juice, and then I can stim again. Now, very conveniently, this talent, or this keystone here, has this side talent called maxed out chems, which can give you more cooldown and more critical hit chance and more of the chem fortified stacks if you can stim once every 60 seconds instead. And that works perfectly when you have only 15 points allocated, because it's 44 plus the 15-second base duration for a total of 59 just under the wire. And yeah, it'll be up just in time if you're mashing that button. But if you have the maxed out one at 75 seconds, 75 plus 15 means you are at 90, and there is a equal odds chance that you will miss it unless you're getting some cooldown from sample collector while that thing is off cooldown. And this long lasting would put you over, and you would have to do a lot of cooling down in order to get it in time. So this long lasting is actually kind of a negative synergy with chemical dependency, even though you would expect the stims to be operating otherwise. And I think that is just about everything here, guys. Oh, let's actually talk one final thing here about the normal stims, in the game. So how do normal stims work alongside this class, specifically with stim supply? Because a lot of people have this question. Well, it is not as interesting as you would think, but it's pretty simple. Remember, you can only pick these up when you don't have a custom cartel special, and you can pick them up. And when you drop stim supply, it just uses them on everybody in its radius. So if you have a green stim and you drop stim supply, you will heal everybody on your team for one segment. If you have a yellow stim, you will give everybody triple cooldown. All of those are really cool and really amazing. However, is it worth it? The answer is 100% unequivocally no, because what that is going to do is make it so that you do not have a dependable way of keeping chemical dependency up, which is your best way of getting cooldown so that this stim supply can be dropped more often. So you can't use this node. And in fact, if you're using Stim Supply, you're probably not going to be benefited from using either Vulture's Mark or Adrenaline Frenzy, because these keystones are kind of weak unless you're investing into here or here. So yeah, you would end up having to go keystoneless, Hive Scum, and you would have to hope and pray that you stumble up across a good Stimm that you can use one time on your team, and that's it. That would be your entire contribution to the team. You would basically be playing a person who can cleanse some corruption and drop a tox bomb every, like, very often, like very seldom, and that's it. That would be your entire contribution, versus if you just took this and just did some cooldown here, perhaps even did a little bit of strength there. Like, that doesn't add that much to the cooldown. 13 extra seconds for 12% strength on everybody. That's not half bad. And then they can all get 50% cooldown as well on a not an unreasonable cooldown. That is just going to contribute so much more over the course of the game than the one time that you are able to heal everybody, the one time you're able to give everybody cooldown together. Yeah, that's just the rub of it. What I personally think is that there should be some talent or some way that you can pick one of these up. You know, maybe a cap per mission that you can pick them up and use them. I don't know, because it's fun. It's cool to be able to use them like that, but it is not cool to not bring your own cartel special, and it's just too punishing. Maybe there could be multiple charges, like the green one can have 2 charges that you can use, or the yellow one can have 3. I don't know, something like that. Food for thought. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this was sort of illuminating. Hopefully you understand a little bit more about the Stim supply and the Stimm in general, and I'll see you out there on the fields in just a short day or two. Thanks for watching. Bye.